Orbital Station 4 smelled of ozone, recycled coffee, and the sweat of 10,000 species desperate to make a profit. It was a chaotic spinning wheel of steel and glass hanging in the void above Earth, the primary gateway for humanity into the wider galaxy. For Eli Ward, it felt less like a gateway and more like the waiting room of a dentist who specialized in root canals without anesthesia. Eli stood near an expansive viewport, adjusting the collar of his stiff synthetic suit for the 50th time. He checked his reflection in the dark glass. He looked tired. The shadows under his hazel eyes were dark enough to carry their own gravitational pull. He was 32 years old, an engineer with a brilliant mind for structural stress points and a bank account that had been hovering near zero for 5 years. He held a data pad in his sweating palm. The screen displayed a document that was a typographic nightmare of legal jargon and shimmering alien glyphs. The header, translated by his budget linguistics software, read, "Official application for mating trial candidate, Human Unit 37. Eli frowned at the words. Mating trial. He tapped the screen, assuming the translation matrix was glitching again. The software on his pad was 3 versions out of date. In engineering terms, mating meant the joining of 2 surfaces or parts. A mating surface, a mating connector. It was obviously a clumsy literal translation for a compatibility test or a team integration protocol. The Interstellar Compact was obsessed with social cohesion. They probably called their HR department the Bureau of Emotional Entanglement or something equally poetic and inefficient. Above him, a massive holographic news feed scrolled across the curved ceiling of the promenade. The anchor, a perfectly symmetrical synthetic humanoid, spoke with a voice like warm honey. Earth's probationary period enters its 6th month, the hologram announced. Trade talks with the Aurelian High Council continue to stall, though rumors persist that the high houses are seeking deeper, more biological alliances. Remember, citizens, in the compact, alliances are sealed in bed as much as in boardrooms. Eli snorted, turning away from the feed. That was just sensationalist propaganda designed to sell cheap tabloids to bored spacers. The compact was a bureaucracy, not a romance novel. They wanted Earth for its water and its fresh genetic diversity, not for its charm. He was here for a job, a technical post. The listing had been vague, but the salary was listed in heavy, solid credits, enough to pay off his student loans and move his sister out of the sprawling, smog-choked megaplex of New Chicago. He checked the time, 5 minutes until his appointment. He began to walk toward Sector 7, practicing his answers under his breath. My greatest weakness is that I care too much about the structural integrity of the project, he muttered to himself, dodging a gelatinous creature that oozed along the floor on a bed of static electricity. No, that sounds arrogant. My greatest weakness is that I work too hard. I am a perfectionist. He reached the end of the promenade. The entrance to the Aurelian liaison office stood out like a diamond in a pile of coal, while the rest of the station was industrial gray and cluttered with flashing advertisements. The Aurelian sector was pure, blinding white. The walls curved organically, lacking any sharp angles. There were no doors, only archways of shimmering energy that rippled like water when someone passed through. Eli took a breath, smoothed his tie, and stepped through the barrier. The sound of the station, the roar of thrusters, the chatter of alien tongues, the thrum of ventilation, vanished instantly. Silence wrapped around him, heavy and sweet, smelling of rain and crushed violets. The gravity here was different. It felt softer, as if the floor were gently pushing him upward, making his heavy boots feel light. Floating sigils of light drifted through the air, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. figure stood at the center of the circular chamber, viewing a projection of a star map. She turned as he entered, and Eli forgot his rehearsed lines. He forgot his name. He nearly forgot how to use his lungs. She was tall, perhaps 6.5 feet, with skin the color of moonlight on snow. She wore a gown that seemed to be woven from fiber optic cables and spider silk, shifting from indigo to silver as she moved. But it was her face that froze him. Her eyes were large, with irises of fractured silver that spun slowly, like liquid mercury. Bioluminescent markings, faint and blue, traced delicate patterns down her neck and disappeared into the bodice of her armor-weave dress. Her hair was not hair at all, but strands of translucent, shimmering filaments that moved independently of the air currents, floating around her head like a halo of aquatic life. Lyra Thessari, official arbiter of the House of Thessari. Eli felt instantly embarrassingly smitten. He felt like a grease-stained mechanic stumbling into a royal court. Lyra watched him approach. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of serene, terrifying authority. She noted the frantic pulse in his jugular, the cheap cut of his suit, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "Human Unit 37, she said. Her voice bypassed his ears and seemed to resonate directly in his chest cavity. It was melodic, harmonic, sounding like two people speaking in perfect unison. Eli straightened his spine, engaging his corporate override. "Mr. Ward," Eli corrected, his voice cracking slightly before he found his baritone. "Eli Ward, it is an honor to be considered for this position. Arbiter." Lyra tilted her head, her silver eyes narrowing slightly. The human was strange. Most candidates who came before her were trembling with terrified awe or puffed up with arrogant swagger, boasting of their genetic superiority. This one looked like he was preparing to fix a leaky conduit. "You are punctual," Lyra observed. "A rare trait in your species, we are told. I believe that time is a resource, just like fuel or oxygen," Eli said, reciting line number 4 from the Successful Executive's Handbook. "I try not to waste it." Lyra glided closer. She did not walk. The hem of her gown brushed the floor, but her movement was a fluid slide. She circled him, the scent of rain intensifying. "You understand the nature of the contract you hold?" Lyra asked, gesturing to the datapad in his hand. "The commitment it requires?" Eli nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. I read the overview. I understand it is a rigorous placement, high pressure, demanding standards. I want you to know, Arbiter, that I am not afraid of hard work. I thrive under pressure." Lyra paused, standing directly in front of him. She was close enough that he could feel the radiant heat of her body, a warmth that seemed to hum. She looked confused, a flicker of amusement breaking through her icy mask. "Hard work," she repeated, testing the words. "You view this as labor?" "I view it as a service," Eli said, chest puffing out. "I know the integration process can be difficult. 2 different systems trying to interface, different protocols, different languages, but I am an engineer. I make things fit. I make connections hold." Lyra's lips, painted a dark metallic blue, curved into a small smile. He was charming, in a rustic, primitive way. He spoke of the sacred bonding of souls as if it were masonry. Perhaps that was what Earthmen were like, stoic, practical builders. It was a refreshing change from the poetic weeping of the Aurelian suitors. "As you know," Lyra said, her voice dropping to a solemn, ritualistic register, "humans have to pass the mating trial if they wish to enter the Compact's inner circles. It is not merely a formality. It is a test of endurance, of compatibility, of the soul's capacity to withstand another." Eli nodded sagely. The mating trial. There was that phrase again. He mentally swapped it for the synergy assessment. I understand completely, Eli said. You need to make sure I am a good fit for the corporate culture before you give me full access. It makes sense. You don't want to invest resources in a component that's going to fail under load. Lyra blinked. Component? I am ready to give 110%, Eli declared, looking her dead in the eye with burning sincerity. I will work nights if I have to. I will work weekends. I am singular in my focus. I don't have a family to distract me. I am entirely at your disposal. Lyra stared at him. The sheer boldness of it took her breath away. He was offering total submission, total availability right from the start. He was willing to give 110% of his physical and emotional self. To work nights, the implication of stamina was not lost on her. You are eager, Lyra said softly. I am motivated, Eli corrected. Very well, Eli Ward. Lyra stepped back, the amusement fading into professional focus. If you are as resilient as you claim, then we shall proceed to the preliminary scan. This will determine if we can even begin the process. She raised her hand. From the center of the room, a small orb made of dark metal floated toward them. It hummed, unfolding like a blossoming flower to reveal a core of spinning, fractal light. Please stand still, Lyra commanded. Do not resist the intrusion. Intrusion? Eli thought, panic spiking for a second. Was this a drug test? A brain scan? The orb hovered between them at eye level. A beam of prismatic light shot out, hitting Eli in the center of his forehead. Simultaneously, another beam connected with the gemstone centered on Lyra's forehead. The world vanished. Eli gasped. He wasn't in the office anymore. He wasn't in his body. He was a point of consciousness floating in a storm of colors he didn't have names for. And he wasn't alone. Something massive and warm pressed against his mind. It wasn't a physical touch, it was an emotional collision. He felt a presence that was ancient, heavy, and incredibly sad. He felt Lyra. He didn't see her. He felt her. He felt the crushing weight of expectation that sat on her shoulders like a lead mantle. Duty. Bloodline. House Thesari. He felt a loneliness so profound it made his own solitary life in a studio apartment seem like a crowded party. He felt a desire that was sharp and jagged, a desire to be wild, to run, to burn down the rigid walls of her society. And then, the flow reversed. Lyra gasped in the physical room as Eli's interior world flooded into her. She tasted the metallic tang of his ambition. It wasn't greed. It was a desperate need to prove he mattered. She felt the shame of his poverty, the protective, fierce love he held for a sister she didn't know, the fear that he was just a biological machine made of meat and bone that would expire without leaving a mark on the universe. She felt his attraction to her. It hit her like a physical wave, raw, uncomplicated, and terrified. He thought she was the most beautiful, terrifying thing he had ever seen. For a second, their souls, or whatever the scientific term for bioelectric emotional signatures was, tangled. The knots of his anxiety fit perfectly into the hollows of her loneliness. It was a snap-lock connection, a perfect seal. The orb cut the beam. Eli stumbled back, catching himself on a wall that rippled under his hand. He was gasping for air, sweat beading on his forehead. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. What was that? He wheezed. Lyra was standing perfectly still, but her bioluminescent markings were flashing rapidly, betraying her composure. Her silver pupils had dilated until her eyes were almost entirely black. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something other than authority. He saw hunger. That was the baseline compatibility metric, she said, her voice shaking slightly before she smoothed it out. It measures resonance. Did I pass? Eli asked, wiping his brow. Lyra looked at the readout floating above the orb. The numbers were impossible. 99.8%. It was a statistical anomaly. It was dangerous. You passed, she whispered. She waved her hand, and a holographic contract materialized in the air between them. It was the final agreement. Sign here, she said, gesturing to the bottom. Eli stepped forward, his legs still wobbly. The text was dense, paragraphs about genetic rights, asset mergers, and irrevocable bonding protocols. But Eli's eyes were blurring from the after effects of the scan. He skipped the block of text and looked for the compensation section. There it was. Full benefits package provided by House Thesari. Housing included. Medical coverage universal. That was all he needed to see. Medical coverage. He could get Maya the respiratory treatments she needed. He could stop eating synthesized protein paste. He pressed his thumb against the glowing seal. The contract flashed gold, then dissolved into a stream of light that shot into the wrist of his suit, leaving a faint, tingling mark on his skin. Welcome to the service of House Thesari, Lyra said. Her voice was final, like the closing of a heavy door. So, when do I start? Eli asked, rubbing his wrist. Do I get an orientation packet, a badge? You will be transported immediately, Lyra said, turning away from him. She couldn't look at him right now. The echo of his mind was still buzzing inside her head, making her skin prickle. Prepare yourself. The transfer is disorienting. She tapped a command into the console. The wall behind Eli began to dissolve, revealing a swirling vortex of blue energy, a worm gate, expensive, military-grade transport. Right now? Eli blinked. I didn't pack a bag. My toothbrush is in my locker at the hostel. Everything you need will be provided, Lyra said. Go, before the gate destabilizes. Eli looked at the vortex, then back at Lyra. He wanted to say something else, to ask her if she felt that weird spark too, or if that was just a side effect of the alien tech, but she was rigid, her back to him, staring at the star map. Right. Efficiency. I like it, Eli said. He stepped into the light. The sensation was like being pulled through a straw. Eli Ward vanished from the solar system. Lyra Thesari stood alone in the silent office. The light of the worm gate faded, leaving the room dim. She let out a breath she had been holding for 5 minutes. Her knees felt weak. She sank into the floating chair behind the console, her hands trembling as she brought them up to her face. System, she said softly. Listening? Arbiter, a disembodied, genderless voice replied from the walls. Display the compatibility diagnostics again. The fractal graph appeared in the air. The lines of her psyche and the human psyche didn't just cross, they braided. It was a harmonic convergence. Subject, Eli Ward, the system intoned. Status, bond candidate. Compatibility, index critical. Note, high probability of emotional volatility. I should have rejected him, Lyra murmured. I should have told him the quota was full. Query. Why did you not? The system asked. The human is politically insignificant. He has no title, no wealth, and his species is considered a Tier 3 chaotic element. Lyra stared at the spot where Eli had stood. She remembered the feeling of his mind, the honest, jagged simplicity of it. He didn't want power. He didn't want a planet. He just wanted to work. He wanted to be useful. In the shark tank of the Interstellar Compact, where every smile concealed a dagger. His earnestness was like a glass of cold water in a desert. Because, Lyra said, tracing the curve of the graph with her finger. I felt him, and for a moment, I did not feel alone. A chime sounded on her console, a priority message. Lyra straightened, her face hardening back into the mask of the Arbiter. She opened the channel. The holographic face of Counselor Varia, her aunt, materialized. Varia was older, her light hair dimming to a dull gray, her face sharp and predatory. "Niece," Varia said. "Report. The candidate has been processed," Lyra said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He is en route to Aurelian." "Good," Varia said. "The Council is watching closely. The Earth delegation is proving difficult. They resist the standard trade tariffs. We need leverage. We need a bridge that they cannot burn without hurting themselves." "He is just one man. Ant," Lyra said cautiously. "An engineer. He is not a diplomat. He is a symbol," Varia snapped. "If a human can survive the trial with a high house, it proves they are worthy of integration. It binds them to us culturally. And if the trial fails, well, then it proves they are savages who need our guidance." Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "Ensure this succeeds." "Lyra," Varia commanded, "our house's influence and our control over Earth's resources depends on this union. Do not let your sentimental streak interfere. He is a tool. Use him. The transmission cut." Lyra sat in the silence. She looked at the compatibility graph, still glowing in the air. "He thinks it is a job," she thought. "He thinks he is here to fix machines." She remembered his grin. "I'll work nights if I have to." She closed her eyes, feeling the phantom weight of his hand signing the contract. "Forgive me. Eli Ward," she whispered to the empty room. "You wanted a job. I am afraid I have given you a war." She stood up, her gown flowing around her like liquid armor. She had a role to play. She was the Arbiter. She would oversee the trial. She would test him, push him, and evaluate him. But as she walked toward the worm gate to follow him home, she couldn't shake the terrifying realization that the test might not be for him alone. She stepped into the vortex, and the light swallowed her whole. The transition through the worm gate was not the instantaneous blink Eli had expected. It was a sensation of being unmade, of having his atoms shuffled like a deck of cards and dealt out onto a new table. When the world reassembled itself, the air tasted of ozone and crushed mint, and the gravity felt lighter, as if the planet itself was gently encouraging him to stand taller. Eli Ward opened his eyes and forgot to breathe. He stood on a receiving platform made of polished obsidian, but it was what lay beyond the railing that stole the oxygen from his lungs. Aurelian did not look like a city. It looked like a frozen explosion of diamond and light. Towers of translucent crystal spiraled upward, piercing the violet sky like needles. They were not rooted in the ground but floated, suspended by humming gravity fields above a churning ocean of liquid starlight. Bridges of pure, hard light energy arced between the spires, glowing with soft amber and teal pulses that carried streamlined vehicles back and forth. Below, in the depths of the shimmering sea, bioluminescent leviathans moved like slow shadows, their scales casting prismatic ripples across the city's underbelly. "This is some serious infrastructure," Eli whispered, gripping the railing. He mentally calculated the energy output required just to keep the Eastern District afloat. The budget for this place must be astronomical. A drone, silent and shaped like a teardrop of mercury, hovered beside him. "Candidate Ward," it chimed in a voice that sounded like a plucked harp string. "Please follow. Your residence is prepared." Eli followed the drone across a gravity bridge. He tried to maintain a professional demeanor, but his head kept swiveling. He saw trees growing out of the sides of buildings, their leaves pulsing with a rhythmic pink glow. He saw citizens of Aurelian, tall, elegant, with that same terrifying grace Lyra possessed, moving with slow, deliberate fluidity. They arrived at a spire that stood slightly apart from the main cluster, connected by a private walkway. The drone led him into a suite that was larger than the entire floor of the hostel he had lived in back on Earth. The walls were made of smart glass that adjusted its opacity based on where he looked. The floor was covered in a moss-like carpet that warmed under his feet. In the center of the main room, a massive, circular depression was filled with pillows of silk and velvet, surrounded by floating candles that burned with a smokeless blue flame. Eli stared at the bed, if it could be called a bed. It looked like a nest designed for a Roman emperor. "Company housing is incredible," he muttered, dropping his small duffel bag onto a chaise lounge that seemed to mold itself to his shape. He poked one of the floating candles. "Standard issue atmospheric lighting. Nice touch. Probably to reduce eye strain after long shifts." He walked to the window, which offered a panoramic view of the twin moons rising over the horizon. One was pale white, the other a deep, bruised purple. The light filtered into the room, turning the silk pillows into a landscape of shadows and soft glimmers. He didn't see a romantic getaway. He saw a retention bonus. He saw a corporation that knew how to keep its high-value technical assets comfortable so they would never think about unionizing. "I could get used to this," Eli said to the empty room. "Just do the job. Eli, fix the integration protocols, calibrate the systems, and send the credits home to Maya." The next morning, or what the local cycle designated as morning, marked by the violet sky lightening to a soft lavender, Eli reported for orientation. He had dressed in his best attire, a clean gray jumpsuit with utility pockets and his slightly scuffed magnetic boots. He wanted to look ready for field work. He checked his data pad, reviewing the notes he had made on linguistic syntax, ready to impress his supervisors. He was guided to a solarium at the top of the central spire. The room was bathed in golden light, filled with the scent of blooming exotic flowers. Eli stopped in the doorway. He was not alone. There were 5 other candidates standing in a loose semicircle, and none of them looked like they were there to fix a server. To his left was a Vexian, a 7-foot-tall reptilian biped with scales that looked like polished emeralds. He was wearing nothing but a loincloth made of gold chainmail and was currently oiling his pectoral muscles with a small spray bot. Next to him was a being of pure energy contained within a containment suit of filigree silver, shimmering with soft, alluring pulses of pink light. On the right stood a woman from the oceanic moon of Thalassa, her skin a pale blue, gills fluttering on her neck. She wore a dress that seemed to be made of living water, clinging to every curve. And she was practicing what looked like a seductive dance move, arching her back and fluttering her eyelashes at a reflection in the glass. Eli looked down at his utility jumpsuit. He felt like a janitor who had stumbled into a beauty pageant. The Vexian looked at Eli, snorting a puff of smoke from his nostrils. "You are the human?" the Vexian rumbled. His voice sounded like grinding stones. "You are small. Do you have high endurance? The Arbiter is known to be demanding." Eli straightened his spine. "I have excellent endurance. I once worked a 30-hour shift to realign a solar array before a flare hit. I don't tire easily." The Vexian's slit-pupiled eyes widened in respect. 30 hours? Without rest? Your stamina must be legendary. The Arbiter will be pleased. The Thalassan woman giggled, a sound like bubbling water. "Endurance is good, but technique is better. I hear the House of Thessari values creativity in the bond-forming process. I have studied their ancient texts. I know 17 ways to initiate a resonance cycle." Eli nodded politely. "I brought my own manuals too. I brushed up on the standard protocols. I find that sticking to the documentation usually prevents errors, the energy being pulsed a confused shade of gray. You stick to the manual? For a mating trial? Best way to avoid liability? Eli said confidently. Before they could question him further, the air in the center of the room shimmered. Lyra Thessari appeared. She was breathtaking. Today she wore a tunic of deep crimson, high-collared and sleeveless, exposing arms that were marked with glowing white sigils. Her hair floated around her head like a cloud of silver ink in water. When she looked at the group, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees. "Candidates," Lyra said. Her voice silenced the room instantly. "Welcome to the High Spire. You have been selected from thousands of applicants. You are here because your genetic and psychological profiles suggest a potential for high-level compatibility with the House of Thessari." She waved a hand, and a massive hologram materialized in the center of the circle. It showed a complex diagram of 2 energy fields merging, twisting around each other until they formed a solid, glowing helix. "The mating trial is not a simple contract," Lyra lectured, walking around the hologram. "It is a bond-forming ritual. It is designed to ensure psychological, emotional, and genetic harmony between allied partners. We are looking for resonance. We are looking for the spark that can sustain a connection across lifetimes." Eli watched the hologram with a furrowed brow. Bond-forming ritual. That had to be a metaphor for corporate loyalty, genetic harmony, probably a bad translation for organizational culture fit. Resonance, that was an engineering term. "You will be tested on your ability to synchronize," Lyra continued, her silver eyes sweeping over them. "We will induce states of bond heat to measure your capacity for intensity. We will check for compatibility resonance to ensure you do not reject the connection." Eli nodded, taking notes on his datapad. "Bond heat. Thermal stress testing. Makes sense. They want to see if we crack under pressure. Compatibility resonance. Team synergy. Standard stuff." Lyra stopped in front of Eli. He looked up, giving her his best attentive employee smile. "Do you have a question, Candidate Ward?" she asked. "Just one. Arbiter," Eli said. "Regarding the bond heat simulation, is that a wet or dry heat? I just need to know if I should calibrate my gear for humidity." The Vexian choked on a laugh. The Thalassan woman stared at him with pity. Lyra stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "It is an internal heat. Eli Ward," she said slowly. "It requires no gear, only your presence." "Understood," Eli said, jotting that down. "Internal drive, self-motivation. Got it." Lyra turned away quickly, and Eli could have sworn he saw her shoulders shake just once, as if she were suppressing a cough or a laugh. The orientation concluded, and the candidates were led to the assessment wing. One by one, they were called into different chambers. "Candidate Ward," Lyra called out, "you are with me." Eli followed her into a circular room made entirely of dark, matte stone. In the center, a pane of glass, or something that looked like glass but rippled like water, divided the room in 2. "This is the empathy chamber," Lyra explained, standing on the opposite side of the barrier. The atmosphere in the room felt heavy, charged with static. "Another test?" Eli asked, rolling his shoulders to loosen up. "The most important one," Lyra said. Her voice was no longer the projecting voice of the Arbiter. It was quieter, more personal. "Words can be deceptive. Eli, languages can be mistranslated. But raw emotion is the universal constant. This chamber amplifies what we feel and projects it. It forces us to see the truth of the other." She stepped closer to the barrier. Place your hand on the glass. Eli stepped up. He hesitated for a second, looking at her. Through the distortion of the barrier, she looked less like an alien princess and more like a woman standing in a storm. He raised his hand and pressed his palm against the surface. It was cold. Then, the world exploded into color. It wasn't a visual hallucination. It was a projection of pure feeling, manifesting as auroras of light that swirled around them. Eli gasped as a wave of heaviness crashed into him. It felt like a physical weight pressing on his spine. He saw deep, indigo currents swirling around Lyra. It was the weight of centuries. He felt the crushing responsibility of her name, the House of Thessari. He felt the eyes of 1,000,000 people watching her, judging her, waiting for her to make a mistake. He felt a sharp, icy spike of fear, not for herself but for her people. And beneath that, buried deep under layers of duty and protocol, was a small, burning coal of shame. She hated this. She hated the trials. She felt like a merchant selling pieces of her soul to the highest bidder to keep her city floating. "Whoa," Eli breathed, his knees buckling slightly under the emotional load. Lyra's eyes went wide. She was seeing him. From Eli's side of the barrier, a chaotic, warm patchwork of colors erupted. It wasn't regal purple or cool silver. It was the dusty orange of a sunset over a smoggy city. It was the gray of exhausted steel. Lyra felt his frustration, the gnawing, constant hum of financial terror. She felt the emptiness of his bank account like a hunger in her own belly. She felt the sharp, protective jaggedness of his love for his sister. Maya. She saw an image of a young woman in a hospital bed coughing, and Eli's desperate, clawing need to fix it, to pay for the treatments, to be the shield that kept the world from hurting her. And she felt his loneliness. It wasn't the noble solitude of a leader. It was the quiet, aching silence of a man who had spent 10 years speaking to machines because people were too confusing. He wanted to be useful. He wanted to be wanted, not for his genes, not for a treaty, but just for being Eli. The colors swirled together, the indigo wrapping around the dusty orange, the silver mixing with the gray. The air in the room grew hot, the feedback loop intensified. Eli looked at Lyra, and he didn't see the arbiter anymore. He saw a person who was just as trapped as he was. "You're tired," Eli whispered. The words were not his own. They were the translation of the indigo light. "You're so tired of being perfect." Lyra's breath hitched. She pressed her hand harder against the glass, matching his position. "And you are so afraid of failing," she murmured, her voice trembling. "You carry the weight of the world, but you think you are small." The connection spiked. It wasn't just empathy anymore, it was attraction. But it wasn't the shallow attraction of a visual crush. It was the profound, magnetic pull of two broken pieces recognizing that they fit together. The air hummed. The glass between their hands began to vibrate. Eli's pulse hammered in his ears, syncing with the rhythm of the lights. He wanted to break the glass. He wanted to hold her, not to claim her, but to tell her that she didn't have to carry the indigo weight alone. Lyra's pupils dilated until her eyes were pools of black ink. She felt his desire, and it triggered her own, a rush of heat that made her skin flush violet. For a moment, they just breathed, staring at each other through the barrier, their hands separated by an inch of transparent reality, but their minds completely intertwined. Then, the system safety engaged. The lights cut out. The weight vanished. They both stumbled back, gasping for air. Eli braced himself against the stone wall, wiping sweat from his eyes. His heart was racing at 200 beats per minute. "Okay," he wheezed. "Okay. That was intense. Is that standard for the first interview?" Lyra was leaning against the opposite wall, her chest heaving. She looked shattered, her perfect composure cracked wide open. She looked at him, and for a second she couldn't speak. She took a deep breath, composing herself with a visible effort. She smoothed her crimson tunic, though her hands were shaking. She walked around the barrier to his side of the room. She needed to know. "Eli Ward," she said, her voice raspy. "What have you heard about the trials? On Earth?" Eli looked up, blinking. The after-images of her emotions were still dancing in his vision. "Honestly?" Eli rubbed the back of his neck. "The news feeds say it's all political maneuvering. Some of the tabloids say it's, well, a harem situation. But I figured that was just sensationalism." "And what do you think it is now?" Lyra asked, stepping closer. Eli let out a shaky laugh. "I think it's the most aggressive HR vetting process in the galaxy. I mean, the emotional benefits package must be insane if you put candidates through this. It's like speed dating for trauma." Lyra stared at him. Then she blinked. And then she laughed. It wasn't a polite, courtly titter. It was a real, full-throated laugh that came from her belly. She covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking. "Speed dating for trauma," she repeated, giggling. "Space HR. Oh, by the stars." She looked at him, and the ice was gone. Her eyes were warm, crinkled at the corners. "You are absurd, Eli Ward," she said softly. "And I think you might be exactly what I did not know I needed." She cleared her throat, stepping back into her role, though the warmth remained. "Go to your quarters. Rest. The next phase is more complex." Eli nodded, heading for the door. He paused and looked back. "Hey, Arbiter? Lyra?" she corrected gently. "Lyra, if the job gets too heavy, you know, the indigo stuff, you can delegate. That's what engineers are for. We share the load." He walked out. Lyra watched him go, the smile fading from her lips as the reality of her position crashed back down on her. 2 hours later, Lyra stood in the center of her private sanctum. The room was dark, lit only by the harsh blue light of the hollow emitter. She was attending a session of the Compact High Council, but she was not there in person. Her digital avatar stood among the towering projections of the galaxy's most powerful leaders. The discussion was dry, brutal, and terrifying. "The Earth demographics are promising," a counselor from the Hive Mind Collective clicked. "Their genetic diversity is a resource we must monopolize." "The trade concessions are ready," another voice intoned. "But we need a binding signature. The Treaty of Sol must be ratified by blood, not ink. That is the old law." "The human candidate, Unit 37, a third voice said. "His compatibility scores with House Thessari are unprecedented. If the Arbiter bonds with him, the legal precedent is set. Earth becomes a vassal state of Thessari, and by extension the Compact. We will own their shipping lanes within a solar cycle." Lyra felt cold. She had known the trials were political. She had known they were about alliances, but she hadn't realized the specificity of this trap. Eli wasn't just a candidate, he was a pen. And by completing the trial, he would be signing his entire planet over to the Compact without even reading the fine print, just like he had signed her contract. The meeting adjourned. The holograms faded, leaving only one. "Aunt Varia, you look troubled." "Niece," Varia said, her projection looming large in the room. "It is a deception," Lyra said, her voice low and dangerous. "He does not know. He thinks he is here for employment. He does not know that his yes will enslave his world's economy. Does it matter? Varya asked, examining her fingernails. He is a peasant. He needs money. We give him money. We give him a life of luxury. In exchange, we bring order to his chaotic little rock of a planet. It is a fair trade. It is not a trade if one party is blindfolded, Lyra snapped. It is theft. It is duty, Varya's voice boomed, losing its facade of politeness. House the Sari is fading. Lyra, our influence wanes. We need this fresh bloodline. We need Earth's resources. You will bind this boy to our house. You will make him love you, or you will make him obey you. I do not care which. Lyra glared at her aunt. I remember my mother, she said coldly. I remember how she withered under the bond you forced on her. Your mother did what was necessary, Varya hissed, as will you. Do not disappoint the council. Lyra, the consequences for the human and his sister would be unfortunate. The hologram cut out. Lyra stood in the darkness, her hands clenched into fists. She felt sick. She thought of Eli's orange warmth, his laugh, his offer to share the load. He was a pawn, and she was the hand moving him toward the sacrifice. That evening, Lyra invited Eli to dinner. She set the stage on the rooftop of her private spire. It was a garden of floating lanterns that drifted like fireflies on the gentle breeze. The twin moons were high and full, casting a silver sheen over the table set with crystal and exotic fruits. Eli arrived, looking freshly scrubbed and wearing a slightly nicer tunic that the drone had provided. He looked around the romantic setting and nodded appreciatively. Staff appreciation dinner? He asked, sitting down. This is top tier. The morale budget must be huge. Lyra sat opposite him. She poured a glass of nectar that glowed with a faint golden light. She couldn't bring herself to correct him. Not yet. She just wanted a moment, one moment of peace before the trap snapped shut. Something like that, she said softly. They ate in a comfortable silence for a while. The food was strange, spicy, sweet, shifting in texture. But Eli ate with gusto. So, Eli said, wiping his mouth with a silk napkin, I've been thinking about the assessment today. The chamber. Yes? Lyra asked, her heart tightening. It was powerful, Eli admitted. I've never felt anything like that. It made me realize that this job, it's not just technical, is it? You need someone who can really understand the partners. Someone who can bridge the gap. Lyra looked at him, her silver eyes sad. Eli, she began. The trial, it leads to something permanent. It is not a contract you can walk away from after a year. I know, Eli said, leaning forward. That's what I wanted to ask. What is the career trajectory here? Where does this lead? Management, ambassadorial roles? I just want to know what I'm working toward. Lyra put down her glass. She couldn't do it. She couldn't lie to him anymore, not after feeling the honesty of his soul in the chamber. Eli, she said, her voice trembling, it is not a career. It is... Suddenly, the lights of the city flickered. The floating lanterns turned a harsh, pulsing crimson. A siren began to wail, a low, discordant thrum that vibrated in their teeth. The gravity stabilizers on the roof lurched, making the table slide a few inches. What is that? Eli stood up, instinctually moving to shield Lyra, though she was the one in armor weave. A drill? Lyra tapped her wrist comms. The display was flashing red. System compromise. Unauthorized access. Trial protocols breached. It is not a drill, Lyra said, standing up. Her face went pale. Someone has hacked the trial mainframe. Above them, the sky bridges turned dark. Security drones swarmed out of the towers like angry hornets. A voice boomed over the city's address system, distorted and digital. The compact is a lie. The bloodlines are poisoned. They'll break the chains. A rival faction, Lyra hissed. They are targeting the candidates. She grabbed Eli's hand. Her grip was iron hard. We have to go, she commanded. Now! She dragged him toward the service stairwell as a transport shuttle screamed overhead, firing a bolt of energy that shattered the crystalline parapet where they had just been sitting. Eli stumbled after her, his mind reeling. Wait! Eli shouted over the sirens. Is this part of the stress test? Is this the bond heat? Lyra shoved him through the door and slammed the locking mechanism. The corridor was bathed in emergency red lighting. She spun around, grabbing him by the shoulders. Her eyes were wild, fierce, and terrified. No! She shouted, shaking him. Listen to me, Eli, this is not a test. This is not a job. Eli stared at her, the reality finally beginning to crack through his denial. Then what is it, he asked. Lyra looked at the door as heavy thuds hammered against it from the outside. She looked back at him. Whatever you thought this was, Lyra said, pulling a slender, glowing blade from the folds of her gown. It is more dangerous than that. We are not employees, Eli. We are targets. She turned and ran down the corridor. Eli stood there for a split second, looking at the door, then at the woman running into the dark. Okay, he muttered, hiking up his tunic to run. Hazard pay. Definitely negotiating for hazard pay. He sprinted after her, leaving the concept of a job interview behind in the smoking ruins of the rooftop. The service elevator descended into the bowels of the city, leaving the wail of sirens and the flash of red emergency lights far above. Here, in the subterranean roots of the high spire, the air was cool and smelled of dry ozone and ancient dust. The walls were not the sleek, shifting crystal of the upper levels, but rough-hewn dark stone, vibrating with the low hum of the planet's magnetic core. Eli Ward stood with his back against the wall of the lift, his chest heaving. The adrenaline from the rooftop escape was beginning to sour into a cold, sharp dread. He looked at Lyra. She stood near the controls, the glow of the panel illuminating her face from below. The bioluminescent markings on her skin were pulsing with a frantic, jagged rhythm, betraying the calm mask she tried to maintain. She still held the energy blade, her knuckles white around the hilt. Where are we going? Eli asked. His voice echoed in the small space. Is this the fallout shelter? Lyra did not look at him. We are going to the archive. It is the one place the wireless hack cannot reach. It is hard-lined, secure. And the guys shooting at us, the rival faction. They will not follow us down here, Lyra said, though she sounded unsure. This level does not exist on the public schematics. The lift ground to a halt with a heavy metallic thud. The doors groaned open, revealing a vast, cavernous hall shrouded in shadow. Rows of towering data monoliths stretched into the darkness, looking like silent sentinels guarding the ghosts of the past. Lyra stepped out, the heels of her boots clicking sharply on the stone floor. Eli followed, his engineer's eyes scanning the room. This wasn't just storage. This was a server farm, but one built with technology that looked centuries older than the rest of the city. Lyra approached a central console and slammed her hand onto the interface. Lights flickered on overhead, harsh industrial white lights that stripped away the romantic ambiance of the upper city. Eli walked toward a floating display that Lyra had activated. He expected to see security footage of the attack, or perhaps a tactical map. Instead, he saw faces, thousands of them. They were holographic recordings, scrolling rapidly. Alien faces, human faces, species he couldn't name. They were arranged in pairs, connected by thick, glowing lines of code. What is this? Eli asked, stepping closer. Lyra took a breath that shuddered in her chest. She turned to face him. Her silver eyes were wide, stripped of their usual imperious distance. "I told you that whatever you thought this was, it was dangerous," she said. "I brought you here because I cannot keep up the illusion anymore. Not when they are trying to kill us." She swiped her hand across the console. A specific file enlarged. It showed a human man, Unit 12, the file noted, standing next to a tall, chitinous creature from the Antares system. They looked happy in the photo. Then the data expanded. Eli leaned in, reading the text. It wasn't a personnel file. It wasn't a performance review. Subject, Unit 12. Status, bonded. Terms. In exchange for the biological binding of Unit 12 to House Kavar, the Terran Coalition receives exclusive mining rights to the asteroid belt of Sector 4. Note, subject reports severe depressive episodes, sedation protocols authorized to maintain public appearance. Eli felt a cold pit open in his stomach. He looked at the next file. Subject, Unit 24. Status, bonded. Terms, debt forgiveness for the lunar colonies in exchange for genetic access to the Ward lineage. Subject relocated to private estate. Communication with origin family terminated. He looked at the third file. It was a draft. Subject, Unit 37. Candidate Eli Ward. Proposed terms, full annexation of Earth's orbital shipping lanes by House Thesari. Candidate to be installed as consort designate. Autonomy level, restricted. Eli stared at his own name. He stared at the words, autonomy level, restricted. He backed away from the console as if it were radioactive. Consort designate, Eli whispered. The word tasted like ash. Annexation. He looked up at Lyra. The confusion that had clouded his mind since he arrived on the station vanished, replaced by a clarity so sharp it hurt. "It's not a job," he said. His voice was very quiet, very steady. Lyra shook her head slowly. "No. It's not a technical post. It's not an ambassadorship. No." Eli let out a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "I thought I was interviewing for a position in engineering. I thought I was signing a non-disclosure agreement. But I was signing a marriage license. No, not even a marriage license. A bill of sale." He spun around, kicking one of the stone benches. It didn't move, but the pain in his foot felt grounding. "You let me sign it," he shouted, the anger finally detonating. "You stood there in your glowing dress and your magic office, and you watched me sign my life away for a dental plan." "Eli, listen to me." Lyra stepped forward, her hands raised. "No! You listen!" Eli pointed a shaking finger at her. "I am not a person to you. I am a bargaining chip. I am a pet you keep on a leash so your aunt can steal shipping lanes from my planet. Humans have to pass the mating trial." I thought it was corporate speak. I thought it was a metaphor. "It is the way our world works," Lyra cried out, her voice cracking. "It is the foundation of the compact. We do not conquer with fleets. Eli, we conquer with bonds. We weave worlds together so they cannot fight without bleeding themselves. It is how we have kept the peace for 1,000 years." "Peace?" Eli scoffed, gesturing at the hologram of the sedated human. "Look at him. That's not peace. That's a hostage situation with better catering." He advanced on her, and for the first time, Lyra backed away. The sheer force of his human fury, raw and unpolished, was something she had no shield for. "You lied to me," Eli hissed, "every minute since I walked into that office. The orientation, the dinner, the empathy chamber. It was all a lie. You were just testing the merchandise. That is not true." Lyra's back hit the edge of the console, the empathy chamber. That was real. What I felt. What you felt. The system cannot fake that. Then why didn't you tell me? Eli demanded, stopping inches from her face. If you felt what I felt, if you felt how desperate I was to do something good, to help my sister, why didn't you stop me? Why did you let me walk into the trap? Because I was selfish. Lyra screamed back. The words hung in the silence of the archive, echoing off the stone walls. Lyra slumped, the fight draining out of her. She looked down at her hands, the energy blade deactivating and clattering to the floor. I was selfish, she whispered, tears pooling in her silver eyes. When we stood in that chamber, when I felt your mind, it was the first time in my life I did not feel like a statue. I am the arbiter. I am the symbol of the trials. I am supposed to be cold, perfect, unreachable. She looked up at him, the tears spilling over, tracking through her bioluminescent markings. But with you, I felt warm. I felt your mess, your fear, your simple, honest want, and I wanted to keep it. I told myself I could protect you. I told myself I could guide the trial, make sure you were treated well, make sure the treaty was fair. But I knew, deep down, I knew I was stealing you. Eli looked at her. He wanted to stay angry. He wanted to hate her. But he looked at the woman standing in front of him, stripped of her armor, stripping herself of her pride, and he saw the indigo weight he had felt in the chamber. He sank down onto the stone bench, burying his face in his hands. I'm just an engineer. Lyra, he muttered through his fingers. I fix bridges, I calibrate engines. I don't do this. I don't do galactic politics. I don't want to be a prince or a consort or whatever fancy word you have for trophy husband. I know, Lyra said softly. She moved tentatively to sit beside him, leaving a foot of distance between them. That is why you are dangerous to them. You are not playing their game. She hesitated, then spoke again, her voice gaining a steely edge. You asked if I was a part of this system. I am. But I was almost a victim of it too. Eli looked up, watching her profile. 10 years ago, Lyra said, staring into the dark. My aunt arranged a bond for me. With a High Lord of the Obsidian Sector, he was cruel, powerful. He wanted to absorb House Thessari into his own. The trial was rigged to force a compatibility match. What happened? Eli asked. My mother, Lyra said. She was the arbiter then. She found out. She could not stop the trial legally, so she overloaded the connection during the final ceremony. She took the feedback into her own mind to break the link. It killed her. But it severed the bond. It left me free and it left me with her title. She turned to Eli. I swore I would use the position to change things, to soften the chains. I pair people who might actually love each other. I reject the cruelest treaties. I try to save who I can. She looked at the hologram of the sedated human. But I cannot save everyone. And I thought if I saved you for myself, it would be enough. Eli looked at her. He saw the cracks in the perfection now. She wasn't a predator. She was just another person trying to survive a machine that was bigger than she was. He felt the anger ebb away, leaving a hollow exhaustion, but also something else, a strange, reluctant kinship. So we're both trapped, Eli said. Yes. Lyra agreed. Eli looked at the distance between them on the bench. He shifted, closing the gap by a few inches. I don't want to be a pet. Lyra, he said firmly. I know, she said. And I don't want to be used to hurt Earth. I will not let that happen, she vowed. Even if I have to burn the contract. They sat in silence for a long moment. the adrenaline of the chase fading into a hyper-awareness of each other. The air in the archive felt charged, heavy with the dust of centuries and the heat of their bodies. Eli looked at Lyra's hand resting on her knee. Her fingers were long, elegant, trembling slightly. Without thinking, he reached out and covered her hand with his. Her skin was cool, smooth as polished stone, but it warmed instantly under his touch. Lyra turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his. The contact sent a jolt through him, an echo of the empathy chamber but grounded in physical reality. Lyra turned to him. Her face was inches from his. He could see the intricate patterns of her irises, shifting like gears. He could smell the scent of rain and ozone. The moment stretched. The fear of the hackers, the horror of the contracts, it all receded. There was just the pull, the biological imperative that the trial had identified, the 99% resonance screaming at them to close the distance. Eli leaned in. Lyra mirrored him, her eyes fluttering shut, her lips parting slightly. He could feel her breath on his face. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to kiss her more than he wanted to breathe. He wanted to prove that whatever the contract said, this part was real. Lyra's hand tightened on his. Then, she pulled back. She gasped, turning her head away, breaking the moment. "No," she whispered. Eli froze, his heart hammering. "I'm sorry, and I thought—" "No," Lyra said, her voice shaking. "Do not apologize. I want to. You have no idea how much I want to." She looked back at him, her eyes fierce, but not like this. Not here. Not when you are still a prisoner in all but name. She squeezed his hand, then released it, standing up and putting distance between them. "If I kiss you now, Eli, it is because the system designed us to. It is because you are scared and I am your protector. That is not consent. That is just another form of the trap. When I kiss you, if I kiss you, it will be because you are free to walk away, and you chose to stay." Eli looked at her, stunned. He sat up straighter. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I respect that." He stood up, brushing the dust from his jumpsuit. "So how do we get free? If the system is rigged, how do we break it?" Lyra walked back to the console. She began typing rapidly. "We find the leverage," she said. She pulled up a new set of data streams. These were encrypted, fragmented files she had recovered from the trash bin of the main server. "Look at this." She pointed. "These are the failed trials, the ones where the candidates were deemed incompatible." Eli looked at the list. Unit 4, Unit 9, Unit 18. Status, relocated. Eli read, "That sounds like corporate speak for fired." Lyra tapped a key. A map appeared. It showed the destination of the relocations. It was a desolate, ice-bound moon on the fringe of the sector. A mining penal colony. "They were not fired," Lyra said grimly. "They were disappeared. These were candidates who refused the bond, or candidates who belonged to rival political factions. They were removed from the board." She traced a line of code, and the authorization signature. "It matches the encryption key of the encrypted channel I used to speak with the council." "Your aunt," Eli realized. "Varia," Lyra confirmed. "She is not just manipulating the treaties. She is culling the bloodlines. She is removing anyone who threatens her control." She turned to Eli. "This is the proof we need. If we can get the full unredacted files, the transfer orders, the death certificates, we can expose the entire Shadow Committee. We can bring down the council." "Where are the full files?" Eli asked. "In the core," Lyra said, pointing upward. "In the heart of the trial complex. Behind a firewall that only the Arbiter can access during a live trial." Eli understood immediately. "You want to go back? We have to," Lyra said. "If we run now, They will hunt us down. They will kill you and replace you with a more compliant human. But if we continue the trial, if we play along, we get access. Eli finished. We walk right through the front door. It is dangerous, Lyra warned. The next phase is the dream simulation. It is invasive. It digs into your subconscious. If Varya is watching, she will look for weakness. Eli looked at the hologram of the ice moon. He thought of Maya back on Earth. He thought of the contract he had signed. He stepped forward, standing next to Lyra. "I'll do it," he said, "but on one condition." Lyra looked at him. "Name it." "We change the rules," Eli said, "between us. No more arbiter and candidate. No more hidden agendas. We tell each other everything. If something feels wrong, we stop. If one of us wants out, we find a way out." "Mutual consent," Lyra said, testing the words. "Radical transparency," Eli corrected. "It's an engineering principle. You can't build a stable structure on a hidden foundation." Lyra looked at him, and a small, genuine smile touched her lips. "Agreed." Eli Ward. Radical transparency. They returned to the upper levels through the service shafts, emerging back into the gilded cage of the trial complex just as the all-clear signal sounded. The official story was a minor power surge. The damage to the rooftop was already being repaired by nanobots. Lyra led Eli to the simulation wing. It was a circular room lined with pods that looked like sleek, silver coffins. "This is the dream nexus," Lyra explained. "We will enter a shared subconscious state. The system builds a world from our memories and desires. It is meant to test our ability to co-create a reality." Eli looked at the pod. "So, we're going to have a nap together?" "A very vivid, telepathic nap," Lyra said. She opened the pod. It was designed for two. Tight. "Remember the pact," Lyra whispered as they climbed in. "Transparency," Eli whispered back. The lid sealed shut. Darkness swallowed them. Then, the gas hissed. Eli opened his eyes. He was standing on the pavement of 4th Street in New Chicago. It was raining, that heavy gray drizzle he had grown up with. The smell of wet concrete and frying street food filled the air. Neon signs buzzed and flickered in the puddles. But when he looked up, the sky wasn't the smog-choked brown of Earth. It was the violet, star-streaked expanse of Aurelian. And the skyscrapers weren't steel and glass. They were crystal spires growing out of the asphalt. It was a mashup, a remix of his home and hers. "Eli?" He turned. Lyra was standing under the awning of a noodle shop. She wasn't wearing her armor weave gown. She was wearing jeans and a leather jacket, clothes he had seen in his own memories. But they fit her alien grace perfectly. Her hair was still floating, shimmering like liquid silver against the grit of the city. "This is weird," Eli said, walking toward her. "It is a synthesis," Lyra said, stepping out into the rain. The water sizzled slightly where it touched her bioluminescence. "It is beautiful." She held out her hand. Music began to play from nowhere. A slow, jazzy saxophone tune that Eli's father used to listen to, overlaid with the harmonic chimes of Aurelian temple bells. "Dance with me," Lyra said. "Here, in the rain, it is our dream. Eli, we can do what we want." Eli took her hand. He pulled her close. In the waking world, he was an awkward engineer and she was a high priestess. There were layers of protocol and armor between them. Here, there was nothing. He felt the warmth of her body through the leather jacket. He felt the solid reality of her spine under his hand. They moved together, a slow sway on the wet pavement. "I missed this," Eli murmured into her hair. "Not the rain, but just being." Lyra rested her head on his shoulder. You are so loud, Eli. Your mind. It is shouting everything you feel. Is that bad? No. Lyra sighed. It is a relief. I am always guessing with my people. With you. I know. She looked up at him. The rain ran down her face like tears. I am scared, Eli. She confessed. Her voice was clear in his mind, bypassing his ears. I am scared that even if we expose them, I will still lose you. That you will go back to Earth and I will be left alone in my tower. Eli stopped dancing. He held her face in his hands. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Not until we fix this. And even then, I don't think I can go back to just fixing engines. Why? Lyra asked. Because they don't look back at me, Eli said. He leaned his forehead against hers. The connection between them flared, hot, bright, and overwhelming. It wasn't the forced resonance of the empathy chamber. It was a choice. The air around them began to steam. The dream city started to blur, the buildings melting into streaks of color as their focus narrowed down to just the two of them. The desire that had been simmering since they met boiled over. It was a physical ache, a desperate need to be closer than skin allowed. Eli's hand slid down to her waist, pulling her flush against him. Lyra gasped, her fingers tangling in his hair. I want you, she whispered in his mind. I know, Eli thought back. I know. They stood there, wrapped in each other, while the universe dissolved around them. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The emotional intimacy was so intense it felt like burning. It was the terrifying, exhilarating realization that they were no longer two separate systems trying to interface. They were becoming a single circuit. The intensity peaked, a crescendo of light and sound and feeling. And then, the simulation ended. The hiss of the depressurizing seal woke them. The lid of the pod lifted. Eli blinked, the harsh lights of the simulation wing stinging his eyes. He was lying on his side, his arm numb. He looked down. Lyra was curled against him, her head resting on his chest. Her hand was gripping his shirt. She stirred, opening her eyes. The silver irises were hazy with sleep. She didn't pull away. She didn't apologize. She didn't retreat into her arbiter persona. She looked at their entangled fingers. Then she looked up at him. That was not a simulation, she whispered. The data, the recording, it will show everything. Let them see, Eli said, his voice rough. Let them see that the human isn't a pet. He squeezed her hand. We have the access now. Lyra nodded against his chest. We passed the phase. The core is open. Then let's go to work, Eli said. But neither of them moved. They lay there for a moment longer, holding on to the quiet, dangerously powerful truth that they had found in the dream. The job was fake. The trial was rigged. But the love, the terrifying, inconvenient, galaxy-shattering love, was the most real thing in the universe. The notification from the High Council arrived not as a chime, but as a tremor that vibrated through the floor of the penthouse suite. The walls of the room, usually set to a calming transparency, suddenly turned opaque and projected the looming, towering visage of Counselor Varia. She looked larger than life, her digital projection occupying half the room. Her silver eyes were sharp, dissecting Eli and Lyra as they stood side by side near the breakfast console. The council is pleased, Varia announced, her voice booming with a distortion that made the crystal glassware rattle. Your compatibility scores from the dream simulation have exceeded all predictive models. The public interest is rabid. Lyra straightened her spine, adopting the icy posture of the arbiter. We are merely following the protocols. Ant, you are doing more than that, Varya corrected, a thin smile touching her lips. You are creating a myth. The citizens of the compact are captivated. The humans on Earth are watching with bated breath. Because of this, the Council has decreed that the next phase, the trial of trust, will not be a private assessment. Eli felt a cold prickle at the base of his neck. Not private? It will be broadcast, Varya said. Live. To the select leadership of the compact and the delegation from Earth, every movement, every decision, every micro-expression will be scrutinized by the people who hold the fate of two worlds in their hands. She leaned forward, the projection looming over them. Do not make a mistake, Lyra. If you falter, if you show hesitation, the alliance crumbles. And if the alliance crumbles, House Thesari falls. And you know what happens to those who fail this house. The projection vanished, leaving the room in a stunned, ringing silence. Eli let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. No pressure, he muttered. Just a live galactic TV show where if we trip, we accidentally start a war. Lyra walked to the window, staring out at the floating city. Her hands were clasped tightly behind her back. It is a trap, she said quietly. If we succeed, we seal the treaty and my aunt wins. If we fail, we are disgraced, and she replaces me. She has removed all the exits. Eli was about to respond when a sharp, high-pitched whine erupted inside his head. He winced, clutching his ear. It wasn't a sound in the room. It was coming from his subdermal translator implant. A voice, distorted and layered with static, spoke directly into his auditory nerve. Candidate Ward, do not react. Just listen. Eli froze. He looked at Lyra. She hadn't heard it. We are the Unbound, the voice rasped. We know the trial is rigged. We know about the relocations. You want to expose them, we can help. Eli's heart hammered against his ribs. He forced himself to pick up a piece of fruit from the table, trying to look casual. We need the access keys to the core archives. The voice continued. The keys only the Arbiter possesses. Bring them to the maintenance bay in Sector 4 after the trial. Do this, and we give you the data that proves the conspiracy. Refuse, and you die in that cage. The static cleared. The message ended. Eli looked at Lyra. She was still watching the skyline, lost in the weight of her duty. Lyra, he said, keeping his voice low. I just got a call, inside my head. Lyra turned, her brow furrowed. Your translator malfunctioned? No, Eli said. It was a hack. Someone called the Unbound. Lyra's expression shifted instantly from worry to alarm. She crossed the room in 2 strides, activating a privacy field around them with a wave of her hand. The Unbound are terrorists, she hissed. They are anarchists who want to dismantle the compact. What did they say? They said they want to help us, Eli said. They know about the rigged trials. They want to trade. Your access keys for their data on the conspiracy? Absolutely not, Lyra said, her voice hard. We cannot trust them. They would use the keys to crash the city's life support or vent the atmosphere. They are dangerous extremists. Eli, or they are the only friends we have, Eli countered, stepping into her space. Lyra, look at the board. Your aunt has us checkmated. We are going into a live broadcast on a Deathworld moon. We are alone. We have each other, Lyra said fiercely. That is not enough to take down a galactic government, Eli argued, his hands throwing up in frustration. This is an engineering problem. When you don't have the torque to turn a bolt, you get a longer lever. The Unbound are the lever. They are criminals, Lyra snapped. In my culture, order is survival. You humans, you love your chaos. You think blowing things up constitutes a plan? And you think following the rules will save you from people who wrote the rules to kill you? Eli shouted back. They glared at each other, the tension thick and crackling. It was the first real fight they had had since the archive. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was the collision of two different worlds. Earth's messy, desperate resilience against Aurelian's rigid, terrified perfection. Eli took a breath, lowering his voice. I'm not saying we hand them the keys blindly, and I'm saying we meet them. We assess. Radical transparency, remember? That applies to our allies, too. Lyra stared at him for a long moment. The silver in her eyes churned. She looked tired. She looked like a woman holding up the sky. If they betray us, she whispered, I will have to kill them, and then I will be executed for treason. If we don't try, Eli said softly, reaching out to touch her arm. We are already dead. Lyra looked at his hand, then up at his face. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion. After the trial, she said, if we survive the moon. The transport ship dropped them onto the surface of the moon. Xylos, it was not a dead rock. It was a churning, violent hallucination of geology. The gravity here was unstable, fluctuating in waves that made the horizon ripple like water. Massive spires of rock floated in the air, tethered to the ground by thick vines of purple lightning. The atmosphere was thin, breathable but tasting of copper and charged ozone. Eli stumbled as he stepped off the ramp, his boots feeling heavy one second and weightless the next. Welcome to the trial of trust, Lyra said, her voice tight. She was wearing a combat-grade version of her ceremonial armor, sleek and silver. Eli had been outfitted in a survival suit that looked like it cost more than his entire neighborhood back on Earth. Before they could take another step, a drone hovered down and clamped a small device onto the back of Eli's neck. Another device snapped onto Lyra. The world turned white. Eli gasped as his mind was suddenly flooded. It wasn't like the empathy chamber. This was invasive. It was a hard-line connection. He felt a second heartbeat thumping in his chest. He felt the phantom sensation of wind on skin that wasn't his. He felt a sharp, disciplined anxiety that tasted like cold iron. Can you hear me? The voice wasn't in his ears. It was in his thoughts. Loud and clear. Eli thought back. It's crowded in here. Focus, Lyra's thought voice commanded. The neural link shares sensory input and surface thoughts. It is meant to ensure we move as one organism. If we get separated by more than 50 meters, the feedback loop will knock us unconscious. Great, Eli thought. A three-legged race on a nightmare moon. Begin, the drone chimed. They began to run. The terrain was treacherous. The ground shifted under their feet, rising and falling with the gravity tides. They had to navigate a canyon where the walls pulsed with bioluminescent moss that screamed when they stepped too close. Every time Eli felt fear, Lyra felt it as a cold splash of water. Every time Lyra spotted a threat, Eli saw it highlighted in his mind's eye before he even turned his head. They moved in perfect, forced synchronization. Eli scrambled up a ledge, and Lyra was there to pull him up before he even asked. Lyra slid under a floating rock, and Eli ducked instinctively, feeling the scrape of stone on her back as if it were his own. "Watch out!" Lyra screamed in his mind. Eli looked left. A fissure was opening in the ground, silent and deadly. He tried to stop, but the gravity flux hit him. He was weightless, then suddenly 5 times heavier. His boots slipped on the shale. He fell. The chasm yawned beneath him, a drop into infinite darkness. Terror, pure and white-hot, exploded in his brain. Lyra felt the terror. It hit her like a physical blow. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She moved. With a burst of speed that was biologically impossible for a human, she threw herself across the gap. She anchored one foot on a floating debris stone and lunged, her hand clamping around Eli's wrist. The impact wrenched her shoulder, pain flashing through both of them. "Got you!" she grunted in his mind. She hauled him up, her muscles straining, until he collapsed onto the solid ledge beside her. They lay there, gasping, their chests heaving in unison. The neural link pulsed between them, carrying the aftershocks of the adrenaline. That was close, Eli thought, his mental voice shaking. Too close, Lyra replied. You are clumsy, and you represent a serious safety hazard to gravity, Eli retorted, despite the fear. A laugh bubbled up between them, a shared, hysterical spark of relief. They pushed on. The psychic storm began to roll in. The sky turned a bruised purple, the air grew thick and syrupy. The neural link began to whine, picking up interference from the environment. Shelter, Lyra projected. There, the crystal cave. They scrambled toward a small opening in the cliff face, diving inside just as the first wave of psychic lightning struck the ground where they had been standing. The cave was small, lined with clusters of quartz that glowed with a soft, internal pulse. The storm outside howled, a sound that wasn't wind but a chorus of screaming voices. Inside, the silence was deafening, but the noise in their heads was deafening too. The neural link was amplifying everything, the proximity, the danger, the relief. Eli looked at Lyra. In the dim light, she looked ethereal, her markings glowing brightly. He could feel her heart racing. He could feel the heat of her skin as if it were his own. And he could feel her want. It wasn't the polite, suppressed attraction of the dinner. It was a raw, aching hunger. She wanted to be held. She wanted to forget the politics and the danger and just exist in the safety of his arms. And she could feel his desire reflecting back at her. A fierce, protective need to claim this moment, to make it theirs. Eli, she thought. We are broadcasting. I don't care, Eli thought back. Let them watch. He reached out, his hand trembling, and cupped her face. The sensation of his calloused thumb on her cheek was doubled. He felt the skin, and she felt the touch. It was overwhelming. Lyra let out a shuddering breath. The pact. Mutual consent, Eli whispered aloud, his voice rough. I want this. Do you? Yes, Lyra breathed. Yes. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision. It was the breaking of a dam. The neural link turned the kiss into a supernova. They could taste each other's desperation. They could feel the exact moment their souls seemed to blur at the edges. Lyra's hands gripped his hair, pulling him closer. Eli's arms wrapped around her waist, anchoring her. For a moment, there was no compact, no earth, no aunt. There was only the fire of their connection, burning bright enough to light the cave. They broke apart, gasping, their foreheads resting against each other. The link buzzed with a warm, golden hum. We just crossed a line, Lyra thought, her mental voice dazed. We just erased the line, Eli corrected, and I don't regret it. Neither do I, Lyra admitted. But the storm, it is peaking. Outside, the howling intensified. The psychic pressure inside the cave spiked. The hallucinations hit them. Eli squeezed his eyes shut. Suddenly, he wasn't in the cave. He was in a cage, a golden ornate cage hanging in the center of the High Council chamber. He was naked, chained, and silent. He tried to scream, but he had no mouth. Thousands of alien eyes watched him, nodding in approval at the perfect specimen. Lyra gasped. She saw herself standing on a podium, but she was made of wood. She was a marionette. Strings rose from her limbs, disappearing into the dark. She looked up and saw Varia's giant face, smiling. Varia's fingers twitched and Lyra danced. She danced while her city burned. It's not real, Eli shouted in the link. "Lyra, it's the storm! I can't move!" Lyra cried out in his mind. "She has the strings." Eli grabbed her shoulders physically, shaking her. "Look at me," he commanded, projecting his thought with all the force of his engineer's will. "Look at me." Lyra's eyes snapped open wide and terrified, and she saw Eli, not the pet, the man who had argued with her, the man who kissed her. "Our choices are ours," Eli recited, shouting over the psychic noise. "No bond without consent." Lyra gripped his arms. "No bond without consent." She visualized the strings. She visualized a pair of scissors. She cut them. The hallucination shattered. The storm outside broke. The silence returned, this time peaceful. They sat on the floor of the cave, tangled together, breathing hard. The neural link was quiet, just a soft, comforting hum of presence. "We did it," Lyra thought. "We survived," Eli corrected. "Now let's go finish this." The return to the city was a blur of flashing lights and cheering crowds. The broadcast had been a sensation. The kiss in the cave, though censored by the official feed before it became too explicit, had been enough. The image of them clinging to each other in the storm had sealed the narrative. They were the star-crossed lovers, the union of worlds. They smiled and waved, playing the part, but their hands were gripped tight, a secret language of pressure and pulse passing between them. As soon as the debriefing was over, they slipped away. Lyra used her override codes to loop the security feeds in their corridor. They changed into dark maintenance gear and hurried through the service tunnels, heading for Sector 4. The rendezvous point was a decommissioned maintenance bay, smelling of stale grease and coolant. Shadows stretched long across the rusted floor. "Are we alone?" Eli whispered. "I am scanning," Lyra said, checking a handheld device. "No active signals." A figure stepped out of the shadows. It was a humanoid, face hidden behind a shifting digital mask. "You came," the figure said. The voice was the same one from the comms hack. "We keep our appointments," Eli said, stepping forward. "You have the data?" The figure held up a data chip. Everything. The genetic manipulation orders, the relocation logs, the signatures of the Shadow Committee. "It is enough to hang half the council." Lyra stepped forward, holding out a small, glowing key card. "This grants root access to the trial mainframe. You can use it to broadcast the truth. But you do not crash the life support. You do not hurt the citizens." The figure nodded. "We are not monsters, Arbiter. We just want to be free." They made the exchange. The plastic clicked against plastic. Then, the red lights on the wall flashed. Security alert. "Unauthorized presence in Sector 4. "It's a trap," Lyra shouted. Doors hissed open on the catwalks above. Security drones, sleek, black, and armed with stun cannons, poured into the bay. "Run!" the unbound agent shouted, diving behind a crate as bolt fire erupted. Eli and Lyra sprinted toward the loading dock. "The transport tubes," Lyra yelled. They reached the edge of the dock. Below them, a vast vertical shaft dropped into the darkness, filled with anti-gravity currents carrying cargo pods. "There," Eli pointed to a hovering maintenance skiff docked nearby. They jumped in. The skiff was a battered, rusted bucket used for hauling waste. "Can you fly this?" Lyra asked, ducking as a plasma bolt singed her hair. "It's got an engine and a steering yoke, doesn't it?" Eli yelled, slamming his hand onto the ignition. "How hard can it be?" The skiff lurched violently, spinning in a circle and smashing into the railing. "Harder than it looks," Eli screamed. Lyra grabbed the gunner controls. "Go down, into the traffic." Eli wrestled the yoke, and the skiff plunged into the shaft. The chase was chaos. The security drones were fast, agile, and coordinated. Eli was driving like a drunk teenager in a stolen car. He banked off the side of a slow-moving cargo barge, scraped the paint off a luxury transport, and nearly decapitated a cleaning bot. "Sorry, my bad. Yield right of way," Eli shouted at the terrified alien drivers as they zipped past. Lyra was standing in the rear of the skiff, firing an energy rifle she had snatched from a rack. She moved with the grace of a dancer, balancing perfectly despite Eli's erratic piloting. "Two on your left," she shouted. "Roll!" "I don't know how to roll," Eli yelled back. "Turn the wheel all the way to the right." Eli yanked the wheel. The skiff did a barrel roll that was less Top Gun and more falling brick. It worked, though. The drone shots missed them by inches. Lyra fired, blasting one drone into scrap metal. She spun, taking out another with a precision shot to its sensor array. "Hard left," Lyra commanded. "Into the service vent." Eli saw the vent. It was tiny. "Are you crazy? That's a ventilation duct. It fits. Go!" Eli closed his eyes and gunned the engine. The skiff shot toward the narrow opening. Metal screeched against metal. Sparks showered down on them. The skiff wedged itself in, sheared off its side mirrors, and popped out the other end into a dark, quiet maintenance crawl space. The engine sputtered and died. Smoke curled up from the dashboard. Eli sat gripping the wheel, his knuckles white. He was breathing like he had run a marathon. Lyra sat down heavily on the bench seat. She was covered in soot. Her cheek was smeared with neon green hydraulic fluid from the vent scrape. They sat in silence for 10 seconds. Then, Eli started to laugh. It started as a chuckle, then turned into a wheeze, and finally a full-blown belly laugh. "Did you see? Did you see that drone?" Eli gasped. "I hit it with the fender." Lyra looked at him. A smile twitched at the corner of her mouth. Then she started laughing too. She leaned back, wiping tears from her eyes, smearing the green fluid further. "You're piloting?" Lyra managed to say between giggles. "It is a war crime. You drive like a blind grox." "Hey, we're alive," Eli defended, grinning wildly. "That's 5-star engineering. Form follows function." They laughed until their ribs hurt. The adrenaline crashed, leaving them giddy and lightheaded. They were cramped in the small cockpit. Eli turned to look at Lyra. The laughter faded slowly, replaced by the humming tension that always seemed to find them. She looked beautiful, even covered in soot and green slime. Her eyes were bright, alive in a way he had never seen in the official portraits. They were pressed close together. Eli's knee was against hers. He could smell the ozone of the weapon and the scent of her hair. The urge to pull her close, to finish what they started in the cave was almost painful. He could see in her eyes that she felt it too. Her gaze dropped to his lips, then back up to his eyes. "We should..." Eli started, his voice husky. "We should wait," Lyra whispered. She reached out and took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Not here. Not while we are hiding in a vent like rats. Not while the job is half done." Eli nodded, squeezing her hand. "Right. When we're free. When we can stand on a balcony and not worry about who's watching. When it is just us." Lyra agreed. She leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek, right over a smudge of soot. "Thank you for not dropping us to our deaths." Pilot Ward. "Anytime. Arbiter," Eli murmured. He looked at the data chip in his pocket, the weapon that would bring down the house. "Now," Eli said, kicking the dashboard to restart the engine. "Let's go start a revolution." The timeline for the binding ceremony was accelerated. The High Council, sensing the unrest bubbling in the lower sectors and the feverish anticipation of the public, moved the date forward by 2 cycles. Lyra stood in her dressing chamber, staring at her reflection. She did not look like herself. She looked like an idol carved from marble and light. Her ceremonial robes were white, woven from Nan silk that shimmered with an internal pearlescence. Her hair was pinned back with combs of spun glass. Behind her, the projection of her aunt flickered into existence. "You look adequate," Varya said, her voice dry as dust. "I look like a sacrifice," Lyra replied, turning to face the hologram. "You look like the future of House Thessari," Varya corrected. "Do not forget, Lyra, that you serve at the pleasure of the family. I have been speaking with your cousin, Celine. She is young, impressionable, and far less prone to these emotional outbursts." Lyra felt the threat land like a cold stone in her stomach. Celine was barely 20 cycles old. She would do anything Varya told her. "If you falter today," Varya continued, stepping closer, "if you deviate even 1 degree from the script, I will have you declared mentally unfit. I will annul your status as arbiter. I will install Celine in your place, and she will bind the human before the sun sets. Do you understand?" "I understand," Lyra said, her face a mask of obedience. "Good." Varya smiled, a thin, bloodless expression. "Make him say the words. Make him sign the soul contract. And then, we own them." The hologram vanished. Lyra let out a breath she didn't know she was holding, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed the silk of her executioner's gown. In the candidate quarters, Eli Ward was staring at a screen that felt like a guillotine blade. It was a pre-recorded message from Earth. Maya's face filled the display. She looked better than she had in months. Her cheeks had color, and she wasn't coughing. The medical credits from Eli's signing bonus had clearly cleared. "Hey, big brother," Maya said, her smile wavering slightly. "I wanted to wish you luck. You're all over the news down here. They're calling you the groom of the galaxy. It's wild, Eli." She glanced off camera, lowering her voice. "Look, I don't know if you can hear this, but things are getting weird. The Terran Parliament just passed the Ward Act. They didn't even debate it. It ties all future helium-3 exports to the successful completion of the biological alliance. They're saying if you don't marry her, the trade deals collapse and Earth gets sanctioned." Maya leaned in close to the camera. "They've made you a hostage. Eli, I don't know what's happening up there, but just be careful. Don't let them break you. I love you." The screen went black. Eli sat in the dark, the silence of the room pressing in on him. He felt sick. He had thought he was fighting a personal battle, him and Lyra against a corrupt aunt. But the scale was monstrous. He wasn't just a man in love with an alien woman. He was the linchpin of a planetary economy. If he walked away, Earth starved. If he stayed, Earth was enslaved. He stood up, pacing the room. He felt like he was back in the engineering bay of a failing ship, watching the pressure gauges redline, knowing there was no valve to release the steam. He needed air. He hacked the door lock, a simple bypass he had learned from the Unbound agent, and slipped out into the corridor. He didn't know where he was going until he found himself in the Arboretum. It was a sanctuary of bioluminescent flora located in the heart of the residential spire. Trees with translucent violet leaves hummed a low, melodic tune. Flowers that looked like floating jellyfish drifted through the air, pulsing with soft light. Eli sat on a bench beneath a weeping willow that dripped tears of glowing blue sap. He put his head in his hands. "Eli." He looked up. Lyra was standing there. She wasn't in her ceremonial robes anymore. She wore a simple tunic, her feet bare on the mossy ground. She looked small, stripped of her armor. He didn't stand up. He didn't have the energy for protocol. My sister called, Eli said, his voice flat. They passed a law named after me. If I don't go through with this, Earth gets sanctioned. Lyra sat down beside him. She didn't touch him. She just sat in the quiet, letting the weight of his words settle between them. My aunt threatened to replace me, she said softly, with my cousin. If I don't deliver you, I am erased. So we're trapped, Eli said. A perfect pincer movement. He looked at her, his hazel eyes dark with exhaustion. I want you, Lyra. You know that. I want you in a way that scares the hell out of me. When we were in that cave, when we were in the dream, that was real. It was the only real thing in this entire mess. He looked away, staring at the glowing sap. But I can't be a chain, Lyra, and I can't be chained. If loving you means selling my planet, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can live with that. Lyra reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cool, her grip firm. I am terrified too, she confessed. I am terrified of losing you. I am terrified of defying my house. For my entire life, the house was everything. It was my spine. It was my blood. She turned his hand over, tracing the lines of his palm. But then I met you, and I realized my house is just a cage made of pretty glass. She looked up, her silver eyes fierce. We do not let them win, Eli. We do not let them turn us into weapons. How? Eli asked. We have to go to the ceremony. We have to say the words. Yes, Lyra said. We go. We stand in the light. We say the words. We let them think they have won. We let them think we are the perfect, compliant puppets. She squeezed his hand. And then, when the whole galaxy is watching, we cut the strings. The plan formed between them in the quiet hum of the garden. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It relied on a group of terrorists and a hacked signal. But it was the only path that led to freedom. That night, the eve of the binding, they did not return to their separate quarters. They went to Lyra's private sanctum. She locked the door and deactivated the internal sensors. The room was dim, lit only by the starlight filtering through the viewport. They stood in the center of the room, looking at each other. The political noise, the threats, the fear, it all stopped at the threshold. Here, there was just a man and a woman. I don't want to talk about the plan, Eli whispered. I don't want to talk about Varia or the compact. Then don't, Lyra said. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. For the first time, there was no hesitation, no neural link forcing them together, no dream simulation guiding their desires. This was just gravity. They moved together with a desperation born of the knowledge that tomorrow they might be dead or imprisoned. They undressed each other slowly, reverently, as if they were discovering a new world. When skin touched skin, it wasn't the electric shock of the empathy chamber. It was a warm, steady grounding. Eli traced the bioluminescent markings on Lyra's back, marveling at how they pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Lyra ran her hands over the scars on Eli's hands, the burns from welding torches, the scrapes from machinery, mapping the history of his labor. They lay down on the soft expanse of the bed. It was an act of defiance, in a system that treated intimacy as a commodity, as a bargaining chip for trade routes and mining rights. Choosing to be vulnerable with no agenda was a revolution. They whispered promises in the dark. I choose you. Eli breathed against her skin. Not for Earth. Not for the treaty. For me. I choose you, Lyra replied, her voice thick with emotion. For who you are. For the engineer who fixes things. For the man who makes me laugh. There were tears, mingled with soft laughter as they navigated the awkwardness of limbs and the profound relief of finally closing the distance. They held each other as if they were the only solid things in a dissolving universe. Later, as they lay tangled together in the afterglow, listening to the hum of the city below, Eli kissed Lyra's forehead. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said quietly, "this is ours. They can't take this." "No," Lyra agreed, resting her head on his chest. "They cannot touch this." The binding hall was a cathedral of light. It was a massive dome-shaped structure made of transparent crystal, suspended high above the city. Sunlight streamed in from all angles, refracted into rainbows by the prism walls. Thousands of dignitaries filled the floating tiers of seating. High counselors in their ornate robes, delegates from the Hive Mind Collective, warlords from the Outer Rim, and a small, nervous cluster of humans from the Earth delegation. Millions more were watching via holographic feeds. The air buzzed with the hum of recording drones. Eli and Lyra stood at the entrance. They were dressed in matching ceremonial attire. Lyra in her shimmering white gown, Eli in a tunic of deep midnight blue woven with silver threads. They held hands. "Ready?" Lyra asked, her voice steady, though her pulse was hammering against Eli's palm. "Ready to give 110%, Eli said, forcing a grin. The doors opened. A roar of sound hit them. Music, applause, the sheer psychic weight of attention. They walked down the aisle of light. Above them, the ceiling projected their neural states. It was a swirling, beautiful nebula of colors. Gold for trust, crimson for passion, deep indigo for duty. The crowd gasped in awe. It was the most harmonious reading in the history of the trials. They reached the altar, a raised platform where Varia stood waiting, holding the staff of binding. She looked triumphant. She looked like a predator who had finally cornered its prey. The ceremony began. It was long and ritualistic. Varia chanted in the high tongue, invoking the ancestors and the stars. She spoke of unity, of strength, of the unbreakable chain of the compact. Eli stood tall, his face calm. He scanned the crowd. He saw the Earth delegates looking hopeful and terrified. He saw the high counselors nodding approvingly. He didn't see the unbound, but he knew they were there, in the digital shadows waiting for the signal. Varia lowered the staff. "We now come to the declaration of intent," she announced, her voice amplified to boom across the hall. "Arbiter Lyra Thessari, do you bind yourself to this human, pledging your house, your blood, and your will to the service of the compact?" The script required Lyra to say, "I bind myself to serve the greater order." Lyra stepped forward. She looked at Varia. She looked at the camera drones. Then she looked at Eli. "I bind myself," Lyra said, her voice clear and ringing like a bell, "but not to the order." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Varia's smile faltered. "I bind myself to this man," Lyra continued, raising her voice. "I pledge my blood not to a treaty, but to a partnership. I pledge my will not to a master, but to an equal. Because a bond without choice is a shackle, and I am no longer a jailer." Whispers erupted in the hall. Varia's eyes went wide with fury. She took a step forward, hissing under her breath, "Stick to the script, you fool." Lyra ignored her. She turned to Eli. "Candidate Eli Ward," Varia interrupted, her voice shrill. "Do you accept the terms of this union? Do you submit to the guidance of House Thessari?" The script required Eli to say, "I submit and serve." Eli looked at the Earth delegation. He looked at the camera that was beaming his face to billions of people. "I accept the union," Eli said, "but I don't submit to anyone." He turned to the crowd, speaking directly to the galaxy. A bond means nothing if one of you is just a symbol. It means nothing if it's bought and paid for with shipping lanes and threats. You call this a mating trial? I call it a hostage negotiation. And I'm done negotiating. The whispers turned into shouts. Several counselors stood up. Security drones began to descend from the ceiling. Varia slammed the staff down. "Silence!" she screamed. "Proceed to the ceiling, now!" She leveled the staff at them. The tip began to glow with the binding glyph, a complex construct of hard light that would burn a mark into their skin, physically locking their nervous systems together in a way that could only be removed by surgery. Lyra looked at Eli. "Now." Eli reached into his pocket and pressed the transmitter key. At the exact moment the ceiling glyph flared to life. The lights in the hall died. For a second, there was total darkness. Then, the walls of the cathedral exploded into light, but it wasn't sunlight. It was data. Massive. Red holographic screens materialized, covering every inch of the crystal dome. The Unbound hack was live. The screens displayed documents, thousands of them. Order 451, forced relocation of Candidate Unit 9. Autopsy report, Arbiter Thessari, mother. Cause of death, neural overload induced by Council Commander Secret Treaty 88, Earth Annexation Protocols. Audio recordings began to play over the speakers, voices of the counselors discussing culls, assassinations, and the rigging of compatibility scores. The crowd screamed. Counselors looked up to see their own names and signatures scrolling across the walls in 10-foot-high letters. The Earth delegates stared in horror as the text of the secret annexation treaty appeared, outlining the enslavement of their workforce. Varia stood frozen on the altar, bathed in the red light of her own crimes. "It's a lie," she shrieked, pointing at the screens. "It's a fabrication. Treason. Cut the feed," a high counselor shouted. "Kill the signal." But the signal was everywhere. It was on the news feeds. It was on the public terminals. It was on every data pad in the city. Eli grabbed Lyra's hand. "Run!" he yelled. Varia spun toward them, her face twisted into a mask of pure hate. "Arrest them!" she screamed. "Kill them! They are traitors to the blood." The security drones, confused by the conflicting protocols, hesitated for a second. That second was all Eli and Lyra needed. They bolted. They sprinted across the altar, leaping over the ceremonial braziers. Varia swung the staff at Lyra, a beam of searing energy slicing the air. Lyra ducked, her wedding dress tearing at the hem. She didn't look back. Guards in heavy armor poured into the aisle, blocking the main exit. "This way," Lyra shouted, pulling Eli toward the eastern wall. "There's no door there," Eli yelled. "There is a window." They ran toward the towering pane of crystal that overlooked the ocean. Behind them, the sounds of chaos escalated, shouts, drone fire, the crashing of benches. Lyra pulled the energy blade from a concealed thigh sheath under her gown. "Trust me," she shouted over the noise. "Always," Eli shouted back. Lyra threw the blade. It spun through the air, humming with blue energy, and struck the center of the crystal pane. The frequency shattered the molecular bonds. The massive window didn't just break. It disintegrated into a shower of sparkling dust. The wind roared in, whipping Lyra's hair around her face. They didn't stop. They didn't slow down. Hand in hand, the engineer from Earth and the Arbiter of Aurelian leaped into the void. They fell. The wind screamed in their ears. The ocean of starlight rushed up to meet them, churning hundreds of feet below. Above them, the cathedral of light receded, a glittering jewel of corruption. Security shuttles dove after them, their thrusters screaming, searchlights sweeping the air. Eli looked at Lyra as they plummeted. She was laughing. It was a terrified, exhilarating, wild laugh. "Hold on," she screamed, pulling him close in midair. Eli wrapped his arms around her, closing his eyes as the water rushed up to catch them. He held on to the only thing that mattered. They hit the water. The ocean of starlight rushed up to meet them, a churning abyss of luminescent foam and freezing waves. Eli Ward squeezed his eyes shut, his arms locked around Lyra, waiting for the impact that would shatter bone and end the contract for good. It never came. Instead, a force like a giant, invisible hand seized them in midair. The deceleration was brutal, squeezing the breath from their lungs and making their vision gray out. They were yanked upward, swinging wildly through the gale, toward the open belly of a battered cargo hauler that hovered erratically above the spray. "We have them," a voice crackled over a loudspeaker, barely audible over the roar of the thrusters. "Retract the mag beam." Eli and Lyra were hauled into the bay of the ship, tumbling onto the metal deck in a tangle of wet ceremonial silk and bruised limbs. The bay door slammed shut, sealing out the wind and the scream of the pursuing security drones. Eli rolled onto his back, gasping for air. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He looked over at Lyra. She was soaked, her white gown clinging to her skin, her hair a wild halo of wet silver. She was laughing. It was a breathless, jagged sound, but it was laughter. "We are alive," she wheezed, staring at the rusted ceiling. "Technically," Eli groaned, sitting up and checking his limbs. "Though I think I pulled a muscle I didn't know I had." They were not alone. From the shadows of the cargo bay, figures emerged. They were a motley collection of species, dressed in scavenged armor and grease-stained technician suits. A tall, multi-limbed creature with chitinous plates stepped forward, the unbound agent from the maintenance bay. He offered a hand to Eli. "Welcome aboard the Broken Chain," the agent said. "You two certainly know how to make an exit." Eli took the hand and pulled himself up. "Who are you people?" "Really?" The agent gestured to the group. "We are the debris of the compact. The ones who failed the trials, the ones who refused." A woman with pale blue skin stepped forward. She had a long scar running down her neck, right over where a bonding mark would have been. "I was Unit 4, she said softly. "My compatibility was deemed insufficient after I refused to sign over my family's water rights. They tried to send me to the ice mines. The Unbound intercepted the transport." Eli looked at them. He saw the cost of the system Lyra's family had built. He saw the scars, the missing limbs, the haunted eyes of people who had been treated like currency and discarded when they lost value. "We need to move," the agent said, "moving to the cockpit. The entire city guard is looking for you. We are punching through the atmosphere." Eli and Lyra followed him to the viewport. Below them, Aurelian was a jewel on fire. It wasn't burning with actual flames, but with chaos. The neat, orderly geometric lines of the city were broken. Massive holographic protests filled the air in the lower districts. The power grid was flickering in waves of blackout and surge, a visual representation of the government's panic. Security shuttles swarmed like angry hornets around the high spire, but they were seemingly paralyzed, unsure of who to shoot in the confusion. "The conspiracy is cracking," Lyra whispered, pressing her hand against the glass. "Varia has lost control of the narrative." "She has lost more than that," the agent said, punching in coordinates. "The data you released. It is tearing the council apart. Half the member worlds are recalling their ambassadors. Earth has threatened to blockade its own wormgate." Eli felt a surge of triumph. "We did it. We actually did it. We bought a window of opportunity," the agent corrected. "But it will not last. The high houses have deep resources. They will regroup. They will spin this. They will blame you for the chaos and hunt you down." He turned the pilot's chair to face them. "That is why we are leaving." "Leaving?" Eli asked. "We have coordinates for a system in the outer rim," the agent explained. "It is uncharted. No gates, no compact patrols. We have a colony there, a safe haven for people like us. We can be there in 3 cycles." Eli looked at the star map glowing on the console. He saw a small, insignificant dot far away from the politics, the treaties, and the cameras. He looked at Lyra. "We can go," he said, a desperate hope rising in his chest. "Lyra, we can disappear. No more arbiter, no more candidate, just us. We can build a house. I can be an engineer again. You can be whatever you want to be." He took her hand. "It is what we wanted, isn't it? To choose each other without the world watching." Lyra looked at the map. Then she looked down at the burning city. She watched the lights of the lower districts, the places where the ordinary citizens lived, the people who had been fed lies for 1,000 years. She pulled her hand away gently. "I cannot go, Eli." Eli blinked, stunned. "What?" "Lyra, if we stay, they will kill us. Or worse, they will put us in a cage for the rest of our lives." "If we run," Lyra said, her voice gaining strength, "then Varia wins. She will blame the chaos on terrorists. She will purge the council of dissenters. She will tighten the grip on Earth and Aurelian, claiming it is for our own safety. And the trials will continue. Maybe with a different name, maybe in the shadows, but they will continue." She turned to him, her silver eyes blazing. "You taught me that a bond means nothing without consent. If I leave now, I am consenting to let them rebuild the prison. I am consenting to let them do this to another girl, another engineer, another planet." Eli ran a hand through his hair, frustration warring with admiration. "Lyra, we are 2 people. We are not an army. We exposed the truth. Isn't that enough?" "Truth without change is just noise," Lyra argued. "Power structures do not vanish just because you shine a light on them. Eli, they have to be dismantled, brick by brick, and someone has to stay to make sure the new foundation is straight." Eli looked at her. He saw the woman he had fallen in love with. He saw the terrifying, beautiful weight of her integrity. She wasn't just a rebel, she was a leader who refused to abdicate her responsibility, even when it would be so easy to walk away. He looked at the map again, the safe, quiet life, the anonymous happiness. Then he looked at Lyra. He realized that if he dragged her away to that distant star, she would never be whole. She would always be looking back, wondering if she could have saved them. And he would always know that he had asked her to choose her safety over her soul. He let out a long, ragged sigh. "You are stubborn," he said. "I am the arbiter," she replied, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "Not anymore," Eli said. He stepped closer to her, invading her personal space, ignoring the watching rebels. "I want the quiet life. Lyra, I want the house and the garden and the boring job. But I want those things with you. And if you are staying in the fire, then I guess I am buying a fireproof suit." "You do not have to do this," Lyra whispered. "You are Earthborn. You can go home." "Home is where the work is," Eli said, quoting his old engineering professor. "And it looks like the biggest repair job in the galaxy is right down there." He turned to the unbound agent. "Turn the ship around." The agent looked at them, his compound eyes unblinking. "You are certain?" "It is a suicide mission." "It is a rescue mission," Lyra corrected. "But this time, we are rescuing the city." They did not go back to the high spire. They went to the roots. The broken chain dropped them off in the industrial underbelly of Aurelian, a place of steam pipes, dark alleys, and the hum of the massive gravity generators that kept the city afloat. They moved under the cloak of heavy technician robes, their faces hidden. The streets were alive with angry crowds. Holographic effigies of Varia were burning in trash fires. "This is dangerous," Eli murmured as they ducked into a service conduit. "This isn't a protest anymore, it's a riot. They need direction," Lyra said. "They have the anger, but they do not have the vision." They reached the central hub of the atmospheric projection network. It was the system used to display weather patterns and public announcements to the entire population. The door was guarded by a pair of automated sentries. Eli didn't hesitate. He pulled out his multi-tool, slid under the panel, and hot-wired the logic gate in 10 seconds flat. "You are getting good at that," Lyra noted as the sentries powered down. "I had a good teacher," Eli said, winking. They entered the control room. It was empty. The operators had fled the unrest. Lyra approached the microphone. She pulled back her hood. Her hair was still damp, her ceremonial gown torn and stained with soot. But she looked more regal than she ever had on the throne. Eli set up the feed. He didn't just link the cameras in the room. He linked the Unbound's database, the files of the happy couples, the ones who had defied the system and found love in the shadows, the ones whose stories had been suppressed because they didn't serve a political agenda. "Ready?" Eli asked, his hand hovering over the broadcast key. Lyra took a deep breath. She looked at him. "Together," she said. Eli hit the button. Above the city, the sky flickered. The angry red warnings and the chaotic news feeds vanished. Instead, Lyra's face appeared. It was 50 stories tall, projected against the night. "Citizens of Aurelian," she began. Her voice was not the booming, distorted voice of the Arbiter. It was human-sized, vulnerable. "Citizens of the Compact. I am Lyra Thessari, and I am here to tell you that the trial is over." The city went silent. The rioters stopped throwing stones. The security drones paused in their patrols. "You have been told that love is a duty," Lyra said. "You have been told that your blood belongs to the state. You have been told that without the high houses, the galaxy would fall into chaos." Behind her, images began to float, pictures of Varia's secret treaties, the relocation orders, the cold, hard math of the exploitation. "These were lies," Lyra said. "We were sold. We were traded." Then, the images changed. Eli stepped into the frame next to her. The screen showed a video of the Vexian and the human from the archive, not the sedated version, but a stolen clip of them laughing together in a private moment. It showed a Thalassan and a miner sharing a meal. It showed two people from warring worlds holding hands in defiance of a treaty. "But this is the truth," Eli said, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. "Connection. Real connection. It isn't something you can legislate. It isn't something you can force in a test tube or sign into law." Lyra looked at Eli on the screen, and the millions watching saw the way she looked at him. "We are tearing down the old contract," Lyra announced. "Tonight. I resign as the arbiter of the mating trials. Tonight, House Thessari's monopoly on your hearts ends. But we are not leaving you in the dark," Eli added. "We are going to build something new, something where you choose, where you say yes because you want to, not because you have to." Lyra leaned into the microphone. "The cage is open. Fly free. The feed cut." For a moment, there was silence in the streets. Then, a roar went up. It wasn't the angry roar of a riot. It was the jubilant, terrifying sound of liberation. The days that followed were a blur of political hurricanes. Varia tried to order the military to seize the broadcasting hub, but the commanders refused. They had seen their own signatures on the death warrants Lyra released. They knew the game was up. Varia was arrested by her own palace guard. The tribunal was swift and public. She stood in the glass box, shouting about order and legacy until the audio was cut. She was stripped of her titles and exiled to the very moon she had used as a prison for so many others. Earth's delegation, emboldened by the public outcry back home, threatened to withdraw from the compact entirely unless immediate reforms were enacted. The threat worked. The compact, terrified of losing the economic engine of the Terran sector, capitulated, and in the center of the storm were Eli and Lyra. They didn't hide. They sat in the negotiation rooms. They drafted the bylaws. They argued over the syntax of consent and autonomy with legal scholars who had never considered those words relevant to marriage. Lyra refused to take the title of High Counselor. Instead, she accepted a provisional role, Architect of the Accord. 6 weeks after the fall, they stood on a podium in the great plaza of the capital. It was the inauguration of the new system. The crowd was massive, a sea of different species waving banners of every color. Eli stepped up to the podium. He adjusted the microphone, tapping it twice. "Is this thing on?" he asked. Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Hi," Eli said. "I'm Eli. I'm an engineer, and apparently a revolutionary." He looked over at Lyra, who was standing to the side, smiling proudly. "A few months ago, I walked into an office thinking I was applying for a job." Eli continued. "I practiced my interview answers. I wore my best suit. I was ready to talk about structural integrity and stress testing." He paused, leaning on the podium. "She said humans had to pass the mating trial. I thought it was a job interview. Turns out, it was a test of what we are willing to turn love into." The crowd went quiet. For a long time, this galaxy turned love into a weapon. Eli said, "It turned it into a currency. It turned it into a cage. And I almost signed the contract. I almost let them turn me into a product." He looked out at the sea of faces. "But I got lucky. I met someone who showed me that the only contract that matters is the one you write yourself. The one that says, 'I see you, I respect you, and I choose you, freely, every single day.'" He stepped back, and Lyra stepped forward. She didn't need a speech. She simply raised her hand, palm open. "The trials are dead," she declared. "Long live the Accords." 6 months later. The morning light filtered through the window of the small house on the cliffside. It wasn't a floating palace. It was a modest structure, anchored firmly to the ground, built from local stone and reclaimed timber. Eli woke up slowly. He felt a weight on his chest. Lyra was asleep, her arm thrown over him, her face buried in his neck. The bioluminescent markings on her skin were dim, pulsing with a slow, contented rhythm. He lay there for a long time, just breathing. He listened to the sound of the ocean below, the same ocean they had fallen into, the same ocean that now sang them to sleep. He carefully extracted himself from her grip, trying not to wake her. He failed. Lyra shifted, her silver eyes fluttering open. She blinked, then smiled, a sleepy, unguarded smile that made Eli's chest ache. "You are escaping," she murmured, her voice husky. "Coffee," Eli whispered. "The most important meal of the day." He went to the kitchen. It was messy. There were blueprints scattered on the table, drafts for a new water filtration system Eli was designing for the lower districts. There were legal pads covered in Lyra's elegant handwriting, outlining the psychological safeguards for the new partnership accords. He started the brew. Lyra padded into the room a moment later, wrapped in one of his old flannel shirts. It was 5 sizes too big for her, trailing on the floor. She came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her chin on his shoulder. "I was thinking," she said. "That's dangerous," Eli teased. turning to kiss her forehead. About the clause in Section 4, she continued, ignoring him. The one about probationary periods for interspecies cohabitation. Lyra, it's Saturday. Eli groaned, handing her a mug. No policy drafts on Saturdays, that is a house rule. It is a stupid rule, Lyra argued, taking the coffee. If we do not define the parameters of the probation, the legal definition of cohabitation becomes ambiguous. Does it include shared financial assets? Shared pets? Eli laughed, leaning back against the counter. He pulled her closer, his hands resting on her hips. You are impossible, arbiter. I am thorough, engineer, she retorted. He kissed her. It started as a playful peck, but Lyra hummed against his lips, deepening it. The coffee mugs were set down on the counter, forgotten. Eli lifted her up, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, the flannel shirt riding up. The debate about Section 4 was postponed. Later, they sat on the balcony watching the city. The high spire still floated there, but it was different. The blinding, exclusionary white light was gone. Now, it glowed with a kaleidoscope of colors, a reflection of the messy, vibrant reality of the city below. Tonight is the first ceremony, Lyra said, leaning her head on Eli's shoulder. Are you nervous? A little, she admitted. It is the first time. The first time it is real. They went to the ceremony as guests, not participants. They sat in the back row of the new Hall of Union, an open-air amphitheater filled with flowers. 2 volunteers stood on the stage. One was a human woman from Earth. The other was a silicon-based life form from the Proxima Belt. They held hands. There were no glowing glyphs, no binding staffs, no threats of sanctions. An officiant, a retired teacher, stood before them. Do you choose this partnership freely? The officiant asked. We do, the couple said in unison. Do you understand that this bond can be dissolved at any time, by the will of either party? We do. Then, by the power of your own consent, you are partners. The crowd cheered. It wasn't the polite, terrified applause of the old days. It was raucous and joyful. Eli watched the couple embrace. He felt Lyra's hand tighten around his. He looked at her. She was crying, just a little. Tears of silver slipping down her cheeks. We did good, Eli whispered. We did adequate, Lyra corrected, wiping her eyes with a smile. They left the party early, walking home along the cliff path under the twin moons. The night air was cool and smelled of salt and jasmine. Eli stopped at the edge of their garden, looking back at the city lights. You know, he said, swinging their joined hands. I still don't understand half the terms in the new accord. Psychosomatic resonance clause? Bilateral emotional equity? Sounds expensive. Lyra laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. It means, Eli Ward, that you cannot be an idiot without my written permission. I think I violated that clause about 5 times today. Eli grinned. Lyra stopped. She turned to face him, the moonlight catching the silver in her hair and the love in her eyes. She reached up, cupping his face. Then I suppose we will have to renegotiate, she whispered. She kissed him. It was a slow, deep kiss, full of the history of their fear and the promise of their future. It was the kiss of 2 people who had looked into the abyss of a corrupt galaxy and built a bridge across it. As long as we keep rewriting the rules together, Lyra said, pulling back just enough to look into his hazel eyes. Passing the trial, Eli finished softly. Just means choosing each other, Lyra said, again, and again, and again. Eli promised. They stood there on the balcony of the world they had saved, holding hands, two glitches in the system who had become its heartbeat. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the moons of Aurelian looked down on a planet where love was free.